After being reborn, the first action I took was visiting the hospital to terminate the pregnancy I was carrying. Following that, I requested a divorce from David. I did not seek custody of my son Noah, nor did I claim any additional assets. My sole request was for a seaview house in a quaint coastal village. The modest 3-bedroom, 1-living-room home was lovingly decorated by me, and all the appliances I purchased were designed for parent-child interaction. Initially, Noah believed everything was arranged for him and dismissed it. It wasn't until he discovered that the pink children's room was filled with dolls and the closet was packed with exquisite princess dresses that he became distressed. Both he and David perceived me as unwell and irrational. Noah wept and implored, "Mom, I am your biological son. Why do you neglect me and give so much attention to your imaginary daughter?" Little did he know, she wasn't a figment of my imagination. I truly had a beautiful and well-behaved daughter who resided in the memories of my past life. Sexar. Half a year after relocating to the seaside town, I received a call from David inquiring about the simplicity of our divorce proceedings. It was as straightforward as sharing a meal together. We mutually agreed that Noah would remain with his father's family, and there was no dispute over custody. David didn't question my sudden desire for a divorce and completed the necessary steps with a detached demeanor. I assumed he was indifferent, much like he had never shown interest in the joys and sorrows of being my wife throughout our many years of marriage. Now, half a year later, he unexpectedly asked why I had hung a portrait in the newly painted pink children's room, a depiction of a woman holding a little girl, seated by the bay window overlooking the blue sea, windmills, and bathed in golden sunlight that softened the girl's pale complexion. I gazed at the girl's face in the painting, feeling compelled to explain that it represented our daughter, Olivia. She was exceptionally beautiful and well-mannered, but tragically unwell. While 70% of congenital heart defects are detected during prenatal exams, Olivia was part of the unfortunate 30%. You had a fleeting paternal affection for her, but soon lost patience due to her frequent hospitalizations and surgeries. You began staying out all night, using the home's tense atmosphere as an excuse when I was drained from caring for her, waiting outside the ICU, hoping that the god of death would spare her. When I signed the consent form to discontinue her treatment alone and watched the doctor remove her oxygen tube, you had an affair with your mistress and openly took Noah with you, allowing him to affectionately call another woman Mom. I remained silent and ultimately only asked David if he had breakfast with Miss Jo that morning. A year after settling in the seaside town, I encountered Noah. At that moment, I had just returned from a trip to Xinjiang, carrying a canvas bag on my back. I saw 2 figures, one large and one small, standing in front of the corridor. Instinctively, I stopped and kept my distance from them. Over time, I rarely thought about this father and son. They disliked me, and my feelings for them had been eroded by prolonged disappointment in my past life. I believed that as long as I didn't actively seek them out in this life, we would never cross paths again. It was Noah who initiated the conversation. Despite being only 6 years old, he was surprisingly articulate, using a child's voice that could sting. The school had organized a parent-child trip, and his grandparents insisted that since I was present, I should come to meet him as a gesture of courtesy expected from the father's family. I silently agreed. He and David truly resembled each other, not just in their refined and prominent eyebrows, but also in their cold gazes when looking at me. In my previous life, when I collapsed at Olivia's funeral and climbed to the rooftop on the 36th floor, they stared at me with the same icy eyes. David had told me to stop fooling around, and he had also said the same to me. In reality, Noah reached out to me just a month after the divorce. Unaware of how I had learned about my move to the seaside town, he called me disdainfully, mentioning that after relocating, I had specifically decorated a children's room and replaced all household necessities with parent-child sets. However, he declared he wouldn't live with me and told me not to bother. Calmly, I responded, okay. On the other end of the phone, I heard him cheer, "Wow, Anjo gave me a new game console again. Anjo is the best," before abruptly hanging up. It was clear that my departure had little impact on his life compared to living with me. His biological mother had always favored games, and he also enjoyed Natalie, who frequently took him to play and gifted him game consoles. But now, the indifference on his face suddenly shattered, and his peach blossom eyes, so much like David's, filled with tears instantly. He clenched his teeth and stubbornly stared at me. This time, it was my turn to look at him coldly. Eventually, he couldn't hold back any longer and turned to run before the tears could fall, but he stumbled and hit the ground with a plop. He remained lying there for a long time without getting up, only turning his head to gaze at me. He had always been like this. Whenever I approached him, he would put on an impatient expression and speak to me coldly. Once, when my attention wavered slightly, he would intentionally fall or pretend to be uncomfortable, making me feel soft-hearted and helpless. But this time, I looked at him with cold indifference. He opened his eyes in disbelief, his face a mix of confusion, puzzlement, and sadness, and he cried out, "Wow, you are a liar, a big liar. You clearly said that you would love me forever and stay with me forever." David frowned and confronted me. "Sophia, even though Noah is young, he actually knows everything. You shouldn't be so indifferent to him." He appeared serious, his demeanor as condescending as ever. We had always interacted this way, more like employees and superiors rather than a couple. He never took the initiative to communicate at home. It was usually me who proactively shared every detail of my life with him. As for me, he was always detached, only interfering or even harshly scolding me in front of Noah and the servants when it came to him. Consequently, whenever he displayed even a slight displeasure, I would unconsciously reflect on myself, wasting my energy repeatedly pondering what I did wrong and what needed improvement. Now, seeing his face again only made me feel extremely irritated. "Have you forgotten what you said during our divorce?" I retorted. "You mentioned hoping I wouldn't disrupt Noah's life in the future, that since Noah is still young, he would soon adjust to not having me as his mother, and that this was for his own good." That was the longest conversation he had ever had with me during the entire divorce process. Now he said it as if it were a matter of course, and I had taken it for granted. At that time, Noah was your only child. Mother and child are connected by heart. He needs you, and you need him too. I interrupted him. "But I don't need him." David was taken aback. Neither he nor Noah had ever seen me behave so rudely. He seemed unable to grasp my resolve from a year ago, never understanding that Noah was not my only child. I once had a daughter, even if only I knew about it. On the day of my rebirth, I dreamed that Olivia was crying and called me a liar. She said, "Mom, you promised me that you would live well after I left." And her crying distressed me so much that I made a promise to her. This time, Mom will definitely do it. I could only fulfill one of the promises to her and Noah. I used to love Noah as much as I loved Olivia. He was the child I bore after much effort, the flesh and blood that sprang from my body. I eagerly awaited his arrival. When he couldn't speak, as long as he looked at me and smiled sweetly, I could forget all the hardships and pains of being Mrs. Gu at that time. I was willing to dedicate everything, even my life, to him as long as he could grow up happily and healthily. David didn't love me. Our relationship was very plain. We were childhood sweethearts who had known each other since we were young and had no suitable partners as we aged, so our elders brought us together. I used to feel uneasy because of this simplicity. When I was a student, I witnessed firsthand how David acted when he loved someone young. He was much more energetic and cheerful than he is now. Every time I saw him, he seemed to be smiling casually, smiling when he was scolded, smiling with high spirits when he won basketball games, and smiling joyfully when he saw the girl he loved. Those peach blossom eyes curved into a crescent like the warm sun in winter, making people's hearts surge and causing them to fall in love with him. At that time, he would send his beloved girl handmade breakfasts early in the morning, regardless of the harsh cold or heat. He would fly sky lanterns for her, fill the playground with hours of light, and loudly express his love in front of everyone, passionately and crazily. The girl was a top student, winning awards in various physics competitions along the way, and skipping grades to go abroad early to further pursue the true meaning of physics. After that, David seemed to become indifferent to everything. Before the wedding, I asked David, "Will we really be happy?" He replied, "Yes." Love had made me blindly overlook the indifference in his tone at that time. I comforted myself, believing that people would always grow up and become calmer, and that the way he loved someone would also become calm, until Natalie appeared beside him. Natalie was a young and beautiful game planner, and I realized that David only knew one way to love. He began to smile when replying to WeChat messages, noticed lipstick colors he had previously ignored, researched women's perfumes, and stayed up late with her to test new games. When I went to the company in anxiety because he didn't come home all night, he was eating breakfast with another woman, carefully peeling eggs for her, something I had never experienced before. At that time, I thought it didn't matter if David didn't love me. At least there was someone in this family who loved me. At least Noah loved me. I didn't know that Noah didn't love me as much as I thought, and this child would gradually break my heart. We parted on bad terms that day with David and Noah's resentment. I thought they would never return. But unexpectedly the next day, Noah appeared downstairs at my house again with a small school bag on his back. This time, he was alone. When the property management contacted me, I was drawing a little girl in a princess dress, running freely on the beautiful grasslands of Ellie. I didn't have any photos of Olivia. I feared that as time passed, I would forget her appearance. Therefore, I often drew her from memory, from her infancy to the last 5 years of her life. I created numerous drawings, filling every corner of my house. Then I thought, how could Olivia remain confined to a hospital bed? I decided to travel occasionally to take beautiful pictures and then draw her alongside these picturesque scenes. This particular drawing was progressing slowly because when I was riding a horse in Xinjiang, I broke my right shoulder, making it difficult to raise my hand. This painting remained incomplete. After a month of intermittent drawing, it was my first time riding a horse. When I chose the white horse, a young man from the horse team hesitantly advised me that the horse had a bad temper, bullied strangers, and had thrown several people. I smiled and assured him it didn't matter because the white horse was truly beautiful. However, midway through the ride, the white horse became furious, suddenly kneeling on its front legs and tossing me onto the grass. Everyone in the team was shocked, and her mother rushed to help me. A little girl anxiously used her small hands to gently pat the grass off my face and sweetly asked, "Auntie, are you in pain?" I later took many photos of her and her mother. She reminded me of Olivia. In reality, the farthest Olivia had been from home in her previous life was the seaside town. At that time, her health had slightly improved, and I had planned to go on vacation with my family. However, David said he was busy, and Noah had to participate in testing David's company's new game. So, in the end, only my mother and I went. Those few short days were peaceful and beautiful. During the day, I taught her to draw in the house, and in the mornings and evenings, we went to the beach to collect shells. She said that once she recovered from her illness, she would live in that place for the rest of her life. Therefore, when we divorced, I only asked for the Seaview house. This home was for Olivia and me, and had nothing to do with Noah or David. I did not want Noah to enter this house at all, and provided the property management with David's and his parents' contact information without hesitation. A few minutes later, the property management called again, informing me that after contacting David, Noah had wandered into the community and disappeared. After all, I had raised Noah with great care and would never let him get into trouble. I sighed, put down my paintbrush, and went downstairs to search for him. I scoured the entire community, sweating profusely, and finally saw him waiting at my door with a smug expression that suggested, "I knew you wouldn't ignore me." I remained silent and, upon opening the door, let him run in like a proud little lion holding his head high and beginning to patrol his territory. He asked, "Which one is my room?" "You must have bought me a game console. I'm going to play games in my room." I didn't respond and allowed him to sit in the living room, waiting for David to pick him up. I returned to my easel and focused on completing the painting. I had only made a few strokes when I heard a loud noise from the children's room. I quickly walked over and saw the painting hanging on the wall at the head of the bed had fallen to the ground. The frame was shattered into pieces, and the perfume liquid that spilled over had soaked Olivia's face beyond recognition. Noah stepped onto the bed and looked at me helplessly. "I don't like this painting. Why did you hang someone else's portrait in my room? Why did you hug her in the painting?" I knew he might have just wanted to remove the painting, not break it intentionally. I also understood he was still a child and shouldn't lose his temper over something he didn't comprehend. However, my tone remained somewhat stiff. Didn't I ask you to wait for your dad in the living room? Don't touch anything else." He noticed my restrained emotions, and his expression showed a hint of fragility. Previously, when I broke something, he would always ask if I was hurt. I didn't respond. My eyes fell on the bedsheet he had stepped on, and I couldn't help but frown. "You should get down first." He still stood on the bed, motionless, staring at me. "Mom, who is this girl you drew? Why did you draw so many of her? Why is every painting in the house of her?" He was too young to hide the panic and anxiety in his eyes. He saw the paintings that filled the house, and the girls in them had eyebrows and eyes similar to mine. "Why do the security guard and the uncles and aunts here say that you don't have a son but only a daughter?" "I said I was your son," I replied. "They said I was a liar. I showed them our photos, but they didn't believe me." "This is my room, right?" he questioned. He jumped off the bed and opened the closet as if to prove something, but was stunned when he saw it filled with princess dresses. "Why did you buy so many dresses? Where are my clothes? Why are there no clothes for me?" He searched the entire closet and finally stared at me with wide eyes, seeking an answer that could comfort him. I watched his eyes gradually fill with tears and said nothing. His tears fell one by one in my silence. And suddenly, he cried uncontrollably, pulling out the princess dresses from the closet one by one and throwing them onto the bed. He swept all the dolls from the bay window to the ground, trying to assert his presence irrationally. "Why do you put other people's dresses in my closet? I don't like dolls. Why do you put so many dolls in my room? I don't like this bed and quilt. This is a bed for girls to sleep. I don't like pink. Why did you make my room this color? Why do you hug other girls? Why do you hang your paintings with others in my room? I don't like her. I hate her. Hate her." This time I couldn't stand it anymore. "Noah, get out. This is not your room. There is no place for you here." When David came to pick him up, Noah cried out in panic, "Dad, Mom is crazy. She told everyone that she only has one daughter." A month later, when David and Noah returned, their attitudes had become cautious. David said, "Sophia, you are sick." He requested that I video chat with relatives and friends, asking them to inform me that the daughter I had drawn, the daughter I had told all the neighbors I deeply loved, did not exist and was merely a figment of my imagination. They produced the family album and forced me to recount the past with them. However, our history was too sparse, much like the album that wasn't filled with photos. There were almost no pictures of the three-person family. Most were of Noah growing up, with some mixed photos of me and him. As he grew older, perhaps due to the nature of boys, he gravitated towards those with more authority in the family who could provide him with better conditions. He understood David's indifference and alienation towards me, and was unwilling to take photos with me. Now they were holding the album with almost no pictures of me, recounting every detail of the past and desperately trying to convince me that I never had a daughter. I sneered. "Are you calling me crazy?" David shook his head. "No, Sophia, you're just sick." He took out a surgical sheet, held my hand, and even became a bit emotional. "Sophia, why didn't you tell me that we had another child?" I looked at him in silence. Guilt and regret appeared on his face. "As for Natalie, I can explain. It's not what you think." He continued. He said that he only paid more attention to Natalie because he valued her talent, and being nice to her was just a means to win over his subordinate. His tone was gentler than ever before. "Sophia, I know that you impulsively aborted the child and divorced me because you misunderstood the relationship between me and Natalie. Afterwards, you regretted it and imagined that you had a daughter. Sophia, it's my fault. I didn't know how to handle the situation well and didn't pay attention to the distance between me and my subordinates, which led to your misunderstanding and sadness, causing you to become so seriously ill. In my previous life, we had been married for 12 years, and I had never seen David speak to me in such a humble manner. I stared at him curiously, as if meeting this person for the first time. You know, in my previous life, when I noticed something was wrong between you and Natalie, you would only coldly respond to every question and test I made. Sophia, are you sick? Even half a year ago, he called to ask me why, but he didn't answer my question in the end. He now believes that I am genuinely ill and has unexpectedly begun speaking at length about his relationship with Natalie. For the first time, he told me, Sophia, You're unwell and need treatment. Let Noah accompany you and take care of you." I agreed to him bringing Noah along. When David and Noah arrived for the second time, they brought a psychiatrist with them. At that moment, I had just returned from Mexico a few days prior. The doctor's last name was Lin. He examined my neck and remarked casually, as if we were longtime friends, "What's wrong with your neck?" I gestured to a thin purple mark on my neck and replied calmly, "I had an accident while paragliding in Cancun a few days ago. It was the final activity of my trip to Mexico. As I was paragliding over the sea and being towed by a motorboat, the tow rope suddenly snapped. I was taken by surprise and fell into the water from a height of several dozen meters. Although I was wearing a life jacket, the paraglider's rope constricted my neck and entangled me with the seat, preventing me from surfacing. I gradually became weaker from oxygen deprivation as I struggled and nearly drowned. Fortunately, the motorboat operator promptly jumped in to rescue me. Looking back now, it still feels terrifying." Dr. Lin didn't ask any further questions. He glanced at a painting on an easel with still wet paint. Olivia was depicted sitting on the paraglider, gazing at the blue sky and white clouds with a smile. He politely inquired if he could view my other artworks. After I agreed, he carefully examined all the paintings in my home before selecting one. He then asked, "Can you explain the creative inspiration behind this piece?" The painting showed a bird's-eye view of the water's surface, with Olivia floating on the water, her back to us, smiling, and arms outstretched as if welcoming or attempting to embrace something. I painted this after returning from bungee jumping on the Gandaki River in Nepal. That day, many tourists participated in bungee jumping. Some were nervous, while others were excited, seeking encouragement from their companions and staff. Only I remained calm. The staff joked in English, saying I didn't seem to be there for fun but rather contemplating suicide, so they didn't dare to push me. However, when they did, they showed no mercy. The wind pressed against my cheeks and eyes as I fell rapidly. The fleeting sensation of weightlessness made me feel like I had returned to the end of my previous life when I jumped from the 37th floor. My memories and senses at that moment were very blurry. Everything ended in an instant. But this time, the freedom of falling felt so vivid. As I neared the water, I experienced hallucinations. I saw Olivia's figure emerging from the water, smiling and reaching out her arms to hug me. When I tried to embrace her tightly, it was shattered into ripples on the Gandaki River. I didn't respond to Dr. Lin's question. He was very patient, attempting to analyze the reasoning behind my actions. "Sophia, when you terminated the pregnancy, it was just an embryo without gender characteristics. Why did you perceive it as a girl? Is it possible you projected yourself onto it?" I laughed. "Are you calling me narcissistic?" Dr. Lin shook his head. "You're feeling self-pity. Maybe you displaced your resentment towards your husband onto the child, regretted the abortion, and created a girl based on yourself. Similarly, it's not that you don't love Noah. You love him excessively, but you directed your anger towards him. Consequently, you can only channel all your love into this imaginary girl. But this little girl is too dangerous for you. You engage in high-risk activities like paragliding and bungee jumping. This imaginary child is leading you towards seeking death. If you don't open up and undergo treatment, the consequences could be disastrous." "Sophia, I want to help you," David chimed in. "Sophia, seek treatment. Let us support you and take care of you." Noah also stepped forward, attempting to hold my hand. His demeanor was more obedient than ever before. I wondered how Mom could suddenly stop loving me. It turns out, it's because I am ill. "Let us help you, Mom. Can you draw a picture for me too? You've never drawn for me before?" I interrupted him. "I have painted something for you. I gave you a portrait as a birthday present last year. When I was young, my grades were just above average, not matching the academic excellence David admired, but I was very talented in art and was accepted into the best art school in China. Unfortunately, my parents always felt that painting alone wouldn't provide a good income and hoped I would marry soon after graduating from art school so they wouldn't have to worry about me and could immigrate to New Zealand with my brother without concern. I compromised, accepting the matchmaking arranged by David, thinking I could continue to paint after marriage. However, I soon became pregnant with Noah, And household chores and raising him gradually consumed much of my time. Every time I tried to calm down and paint a good picture, Noah would suddenly start crying, and I had to set aside the paintbrush to soothe him. Eventually, I gave it up until Noah's 5th birthday when I suddenly decided to pick up the paintbrush again and painted a portrait for him. But he obviously preferred the game console that Natalie had given him, so he just tossed it aside. Later, I found the painting under the small desk in his room, folded into small squares to pad the table legs. Noah trembled defensively. "I didn't mean to do that. I must have taken the wrong thing." I smiled and confronted him. "No, you did it on purpose because that day you dragged your feet and refused to take a shower, so I took away your game console. You did this intentionally to retaliate against me. You've always been like this. Whenever I don't do what you want, you hurt me by destroying the gifts I gave you and ruining my kindness. You know I love you and care about you, and it saddens me when you do this. You want to make me sad, don't you?" Noah's face paled slightly, and he stammered for a long time without responding. I looked up at David. I had already noticed his hidden intent to reconcile. For example, in the past, Noah's school never organized a parent-child trip. In the Gu family, with so many bodyguards and nannies, how could they let Noah run out alone without rushing? Whether in the past life or after rebirth, he hadn't worn the clothes I bought for him for a long time. From one day on, he, who never bothered about buying clothes, started purchasing them himself and coming home. Later, I discovered that Natalie had been buying these clothes for him to make Natalie happy. He never wore the clothes I bought again, and even changed his perfume to a leather scent that Natalie preferred. However, he had visited me a few times recently, deliberately wearing the clothes I had bought for him and spraying my favorite woody perfume. I just don't care. I don't care why he suddenly wants to reconcile with me after a year. And I don't care why he didn't just bring Natalie into the house when I had already made room because I don't care. I didn't say it out loud, but he was used to being arrogant towards me. Even if he sought peace, he couldn't let go of his pride. He only wanted to use Noah to soften my heart and turn back. Now, he believed I was ill, and seemed to have found a step towards me. His attitude changed 180 degrees in an instant. He had learned to be gentle and accommodating, as if I were suddenly a fragile being needing his protection because I was a patient. All his actions had a significant and selfless reason for my well-being. He performed so sincerely that I almost believed him. "David, you said there's nothing between you and Natalie. So why did you spend a lot of money to commission the finest jade-carved Buddha statues by hand and climb the 9,981 steps of Nanon Temple, kneeling step by step, just because she is prone to illness? Why did you ask the monk to consecrate it? Even when Olivia was seriously ill in her past life as a father, you never did this for her. Why did you use the excuse of working overtime to accompany her on Valentine's Day? Why did you hug and kiss her?" David's face contorted, and I smiled. "Are you wondering how I know all this so clearly? Your son told me." The first time I heard about Natalie was from Noah. Suddenly one day he began frequently mentioning how good Aunt Jo was. What did Aunt Jo do with Dad? "Mom, why can't you be as good as Aunt Jo?" At first, he might have been unintentional, but later it was clearly deliberate. I have said that he is precocious. After observing that I became sad whenever I heard about Natalie, he would intentionally bring up Natalie as long as I did something that upset him. I know he likes Natalie and those games, but he might not actually want her to be his mother. He just enjoys exposing his father's intimacy with other women as a way to punish and confront me, especially after I had Olivia in my past life. His behavior became increasingly severe during my pregnancy. He would say, intentionally or not, "Mom is fat and ugly, not like Aunt Jo, who is thin and pretty." When I was breastfeeding, he would casually remark, "Mom's belly is so loose and has so many wrinkles. Her clothes are so shabby with milk stains, and she smells like milk. No wonder Daddy has to sleep in a separate room from you." When I accompanied Olivia in the hospital for surgery, he would tell me from time to time that David gave Natalie this today, and David accompanied Natalie to do that tomorrow, stating happily that Natalie was amazing and had designed a new game, and she had a new game to play, unlike me, who was useless. After returning from a business trip with David, he would tell me that he and Natalie went to certain places and did certain activities, and others called them a family of 3. He would show me photos of the three of them taken together and ask if they were good. He thought he was concealing it well. But every time he said these things, I could clearly see the malice in his eyes. For the first time, I experienced the naive viciousness of a child. He was like a devil repeating curses in my ears every day, driving me crazy. I knew that at that time, many bored relatives and friends would instigate him, saying that if I had a second child, I would only love Olivia and not him. I also questioned myself if I was really partial to him and Olivia, which led to his erratic behavior. But I thought about it repeatedly and was certain that I wasn't. Even though I was running between the hospital and home for a long time for Olivia's sake, I would check on Noah's well-being every day, carefully ask the nanny if he was eating properly, and help him check his homework for parent-teacher meetings. Unless Olivia had an operation, I would force myself to attend, even if I stayed up in the hospital for 48 hours straight. In fact, before Olivia was born, he didn't like my company. He always thought I was nagging and annoying and did nothing but revolve around him daily. He preferred being alone in his room playing games. But when I stopped spending time with him and gave his sister the attention and time he didn't want, he became unhappy again. He can refuse it and not cherish it, but I can't give it to others. I don't know who he resembles with this selfish, bad character. It wasn't until I left David without hesitation after my rebirth that I realized he resembled his father, the man who was busy cheating on me and studying how to divorce me when I was exhausted by Olivia's illness, and my heart was broken by Noah's occasional intentional provocation. Why didn't I want a divorce? I'm not a masochist or a person who craves love. I can't live without David, but for Olivia, I can't. The cost of Olivia's treatment is unaffordable with ordinary income. If I leave Olivia to David after the divorce, I'm worried about his attitude, that he would rather spend time with Natalie than go to the hospital to see Olivia. Olivia's heart condition might not withstand the stress of family changes, so I could only grit my teeth and hold on. Later, I kept pondering why David could love Noah, but not Olivia. Olivia was so beautiful and well-behaved in the face of illness and countless surgeries. She always endured until she couldn't hold back her tears, even though she was scared in the hospital with only the nurses. She always advised me to rest more. She missed her father and brother and was confused about why they never came to see her, but she never asked or said anything. At only a few years old, she was so sensible that it was distressing. It wasn't until after Olivia died that I found the long-prepared divorce agreement in his study, and I understood that because of her existence, he couldn't file for divorce with me. A man who files for divorce from his wife when his daughter is struggling on the brink of death would face a public opinion storm. He and Natalie couldn't afford to lose this man, so he took his anger out on Olivia. Noah saw his indifference to Olivia and followed suit, even though Olivia liked him as a brother very much. He was unwilling to stay in the hospital longer to accompany his poor sister. Even when I forced him to come, he would just sit there with his head down playing games, ignoring Olivia when she talked to him. Even when I wasn't around, he would deliberately provoke Olivia, just as he provokes me. The day Olivia passed away was her 5th birthday. I called David and begged him to come home in the evening so our family of 4 could celebrate her birthday. The birthday gift I had prepared for Olivia was a painting I had created again after my rebirth and hung in the children's room, but it was destroyed by Noah. I held her and sat on the bay window with the blue sea and windmills outside, and the golden sunlight falling on her face, covering her sickly pallor. Olivia loved it very much and kept it by her side, looking at it occasionally. But David didn't return until he was ready to light the candles on the cake. I saw the disappointment in Olivia's eyes. I hid in the kitchen and called David, but no one answered. When I returned to the living room, I was still contemplating how to explain to Olivia that her father was absent from her birthday party when I heard 11-year-old Noah looking at the painting with contempt and disdain, saying maliciously, "It's so ugly. Your face is as white as a ghost. In our school, girls as ugly as you will only be hated. No wonder your father doesn't want to spend your birthday with you." Olivia turned pale. I couldn't believe my ears. Could it be that Noah always spoke to Olivia so harshly when I couldn't see? I had never hit Noah since he grew up, but this time I couldn't help but slap him. He covered his cheek, looked at me in shock, and shouted angrily, "Dad went on a date with Natalie. He won't come back to spend the birthday with the sickly girl. No matter how many calls you make, it's useless. In the future, I will not spend her birthday with her anymore. Dad will divorce you and marry Natalie. I will be with their family of 3. I don't want the sickly girl, nor you." Olivia collapsed on the spot. Covering her heart, that day, when I carried her soft body to the ambulance, I prayed desperately for God's mercy again, but after the doctor rescued her, he still told me that Olivia's physical condition couldn't endure another operation, and they advised me to give up. I looked at Olivia in pain on the hospital bed, my head spinning and extremely confused. I desperately called David, but he never answered. Later, I learned he was in Natalie's bed. In the end, I signed the consent form to cease treatment, alone, watching the doctor remove Olivia's oxygen tube and shut down all the equipment. David was the last to arrive at the hospital. David's parents and even the funeral home staff came, and he hurried over. He asked me why I didn't wait for him, why I gave up treatment without authorization. I thought, what was I waiting for him for? Waiting for him to get up from his lover's bed and come to Olivia's side to act like a loving father so that others wouldn't say he wasn't even there when his daughter was dying? For his reputation, my Olivia had to struggle for a few more hours. I looked at him and then at Noah, who stood far outside the ward door. The expressions of father and son were exactly the same. Indifference. One was busy having an affair while his biological daughter was dying, and he didn't even attend her last birthday. The other viciously provoked his own sister to death. Why could they remain so calm? Why didn't they shed a single tear? I suddenly felt that the father and son were so terrible. I realize these are things from my past life that have not happened in this life and will never happen again. Maybe I shouldn't judge 6-year-old Noah for crimes that never occurred in this life, but I have no choice. I gently broke free from Noah's hand and smiled at Dr. Lin. "Dr. Lin, you are wrong. The little girl in the painting is not dangerous to me, but David and Noah are. If one day I go insane and die, it must be these 2 people who pushed me into madness and death." When David and Noah arrived for the 3rd time, their attitude turned tough again. At that time, I was preparing to leave for Iceland. Just as I was about to enter the elevator with my suitcase, David stopped me. He emerged from another elevator and threatened me. "Sophia, if you still don't want to accept psychiatric treatment, I can only force you to be sent to a mental hospital." I looked at him amused. "What authority do you have to force me to be hospitalized? We are divorced, and you are not my guardian. There is nothing between us." Ex-husband Noah interrupted. "Then I can do it. I am your son." I looked down at him. "It's a pity you are not yet an adult. They can't do anything to me." I turned around and left. David reached out to stop me again, but he broke the necklace around my neck. The necklace fell to the ground, and the pendant's cover was shattered, revealing the portrait of Olivia that I had printed as a small photo. David stared at the small portrait and finally couldn't suppress his temper. "Since you decided to abort the child, you shouldn't regret it." I held the necklace pendant tightly with trembling hands, not allowing myself to show any weakness, and slapped him back. He doesn't understand anything. He knows nothing after rebirth. I hesitated and struggled, but in the previous life, Olivia lay on the hospital bed in pain, crying and saying to me, "Mom, I feel so uncomfortable. I am in so much pain. If there is a next life, can I not come into the world? I really have no choice." I put the broken necklace in my pocket, no longer looking at David. Noah pulled the suitcase and entered the elevator. Iceland during the winter exudes a profound sense of isolation, with powerful waves crashing onto the black sand beaches. The black sand and gravel, created by lava, sharply contrast with the white waves, waterfalls, volcanoes, glaciers, and fjords. A small island near the Arctic Circle boasts numerous unique landforms and stunning landscapes. In winter, daylight is scarce, and the sun remains perpetually close to the horizon. The morning light blends almost seamlessly with the evening glow, and the sky often displays a long-lasting pink and purple Venus belt. Upon my arrival, I brought along a collection of expensive photography gear. After landing at Keflavik Airport, I rented a car with the intention of exploring the island in pursuit of the Aurora Borealis. However, the Aurora KP index was either below 1 on clear nights, or the weather was unfavorable with thick clouds, preventing me from capturing any images. On the final day of my journey, the weather forecast predicted a blizzard for the following evening, potentially closing the roads for several days. Reluctantly, I decided to cut my trip short. feeling disappointed about not photographing the aurora. Despite the aurora KP index remaining at 1 that day, I noticed the sky was still clear, so I chose to venture out at night, hoping for better luck. I discovered an isolated wasteland in the wilderness and waited in my car until 3 a.m., but still saw nothing. Discouraged, I contemplated giving up. Just as I was about to start the car and leave, the aurora appeared. Green bands of light danced across the sky, flickering and shifting in a mesmerizing and enigmatic display. I quickly set up my camera equipment and found a spot with the widest possible view to capture this natural marvel. The temperature was over 10 degrees below zero, so I stood outside to watch the aurora for a while, but couldn't bear the cold any longer. I returned to my car to rest and let the equipment take automatic shots. The necklace David had given me was hanging on the rearview mirror, with Olivia smiling at me from the pendant. I looked at her face and smiled, thinking, "Olivia, your mother took you to chase the northern lights." I lay in the car, watching the aurora dance outside the window until I eventually fell asleep. When I awoke, it was already dawn. A strong wind had blown outside, and the area where I had set up my photographic equipment was some distance from where I had parked the car. Flying snow and dust reduced visibility so much that I couldn't locate where I had placed my gear. While seated in the car, I calculated the time needed to drive back to Reykjavik, considering the impending blizzard. I exited the vehicle to retrieve my equipment amidst the wind and snow, unaware that Iceland's weather forecasts often underestimated blizzard timings, leading to delays. Upon reaching the setup location, I found both tripods toppled and one camera blown away by the wind. Searching through the deeper snow than the previous night, I eventually found the damaged camera. Fearing that melting snow might corrupt the SD card, I quickly placed the SD cards from both cameras into my pocket. As I packed up my gear and began to walk back, the surroundings had turned white with visibility dropping below 5 meters. The car key I rented lacked a remote search function, so I had to carry the 2 heavy cameras and a tripod, navigating towards the car by feel. After walking a considerable distance beyond the setup site, I realized I was lost in the early blizzard. Attempting to determine my direction, I became exhausted and had to abandon the heavy camera and tripod, yet still couldn't find the car. I took out my mobile phone to call for assistance, but discovered there was no signal. Left with no choice, I wandered blindly through the howling blizzard alone. The storm intensified, with biting strong winds laden with snow particles striking me so forcefully that I couldn't open my eyes. My pace slowed as my body began to lose heat, and my limbs grew stiff and cold. I understood I couldn't stop, and instinctively kept moving forward until I collapsed in the snow. I believed I was going to perish in a snowstorm in a foreign land, but I felt no fear, somewhat relieved. In my heart, I apologized to Olivia, regretting that I couldn't keep my promise to her. Deep down, Dr. Len had been right. I was indeed unwell. After Olivia's death in my previous life, I battled severe depression. Whether I was already ill when I discovered David's infidelity, or became so after Noah's provocations, accompanying Olivia through surgeries and hospitalizations each day made the world seem gray and filled with malice. My husband and son were indifferent, and my daughter pitiful. Despite my efforts and daily struggles, I couldn't find a way forward or a glimmer of hope. For Olivia, I forced myself to persevere, always masking the family's fractures and the ugly sides of my father and brother to prevent her from noticing. Until Olivia died, all the repressed negative emotions suddenly erupted, engulfing me like an abyss. While telling myself not to die and promising Olivia that I would live well even if she left, I couldn't control my actions and ended up harming myself. Initially, David and Noah felt guilty, trying to maintain composure, but their feelings towards Olivia's death weren't entirely indifferent. People often exhibit contradictory behaviors, on one hand attempting to escape their sins, and on the other feeling guilty and wanting to make amends. They continued to present a facade of a happy family, pretending nothing was wrong, but it didn't work for me. I always remembered their cold stares by Olivia's bedside. No matter how much they smiled or acted gentle around me, they appeared cold-blooded, terrifying, hateful, and monstrous. As they grew closer to me, my condition worsened. I couldn't help but cry in the middle of the night, lose my temper, or harm myself. Eventually, they grew impatient, ashamed of me, and viewed me as a burden. David began skipping home, and Noah's demeanor turned icy again. One day, as I stood on the 37th floor rooftop, Noah angrily yelled that Olivia's death was entirely my fault, unrelated to anyone else. He claimed there was no genetic disease in our family, and that if I hadn't failed to ensure Olivia's health, she wouldn't have fallen ill or died. Shocked, I realized it must have been my negligence during pregnancy that led to Olivia's heart condition, breaking the thin line that had kept me from embracing death. Overwhelmed, I jumped from the rooftop. Depression doesn't heal itself through rebirth. Even if I were to live another life, those negative emotions would persist. On the day of the abortion, I wished to bleed all the blood on the operating table and leave with Olivia. I dreamt about her. She always cried and begged me not to die. I didn't want to disappoint her. Returning home, I saw David and Noah continuing their unscrupulous ways. They understood nothing, knew nothing. Only, I remembered everything about my past life. I alone bore the pain, remembered their sins, and saw their abominable faces. I fled from those two monsters, but the negative emotions lingered. The pain and guilt remained. I couldn't break my promise to Olivia, so I clung to her memory, relying on my longing for her to repeatedly remind myself to fight depression. I decorated a nursery for her, pretending she was still with me, painted numerous portraits of her until I nearly went insane, traveled to appreciate the world in her honor, and tried to convince myself that everything was changing for the better. I attempted to let go of the negative emotions, but I couldn't stop contemplating death. Every time I engaged in high-risk activities, I deceived myself into believing Olivia was encouraging me, when in reality, I was seeking the release I yearned for. Finally, my long-awaited death arrived. Amid the white wind and snow, I felt calm and slowly closed my eyes. A continuous car horn pierced the snowstorm with zero visibility. The harsh sound cut through the wind and snow, directly into my ears. It was relentless and irritating, making me want to give up after struggling with the dark and negative parts of myself for so long. Amid the persistent honking, I genuinely felt like surrendering. But thinking of Olivia gave me the strength to persevere. I finally opened my eyes, struggled to rise from the snow, and touched the tripod I had discarded earlier. I realized it had been spinning in place. Using the tripod as a crutch and my almost numb limbs, I crawled toward the direction of the car horn with all my remaining strength. 1 step, 2 steps, 3 steps. When I finally located the car, it was no more than 100 meters away. Trembling, I opened the car door and witnessed a magical scene. No matter how much I reflect on it later, it felt like Olivia's soul had saved me from the deadly snowstorm, guiding me to safety. It was improbable, but perhaps the heavy tripod I placed on the passenger seat had tilted toward the driver's side due to the blizzard shaking the car. The necklace hanging from the rearview mirror somehow detached and tangled the tripod around the steering wheel, causing the horn to sound. Olivia, smiling from the pendant, appeared amid the constant honking. Overwhelmed, I burst into tears. After returning to the car that day, the phone signal was restored. I called the rescue number, and half an hour later, Icelandic rescuers arrived and took me to a local hospital for examination. Fortunately, my frostbite wasn't severe, and I went home a few days later. After experiencing that blizzard, my depression seemed to lift. I had always known this seaside town was beautiful, but during the year I lived here, I had been numb, unable to feel anything, even when traveling and seeing beautiful scenery. However, after returning from Iceland, everything felt different. The distant windmills turned leisurely, the blue sea gently lapped the golden beaches, and the sunset on the rusty broken boat was so stunning that it stopped time. The world was no longer gray, but filled with vibrant colors. I continued to live here, painting and traveling, but I no longer engaged in dangerous activities. I began exploring new media, posting my paintings of Olivia and some of my travel photography online, which garnered significant attention. I suddenly became a recognized painter and photographer with many fans. A year later, someone contacted me to help organize an exhibition, and I agreed. The theme was Angels Have Been Here, featuring all paintings of Olivia. On opening day, many people attended unexpectedly, including David and Noah. Although I didn't take their presence seriously, they were actually harassing me. After failing to coerce me into accepting psychological treatment, David changed his approach. During our marriage, he never gave me flowers or surprises, and now he tried to use this opportunity to persuade me to remarry him. I sneered at him. As for Noah, he had always been extremely jealous whenever he saw me preparing things for Olivia's home. In the past, he preferred games, but now, no matter how many games Natalie gave him, he would dismiss her, just as David had fired her. It seemed he now sought my maternal love more than games. He tearfully claimed, "Mom, I am your biological son. Why don't you even look at me?" while treating his imaginary daughter so well. A week ago, they had stopped bothering me, and I thought they had finally grown tired and gave up. However, they returned to my exhibition again. Seeing my tense expression, David bitterly said, "You don't have to be like this. We're not here to cause trouble." He gazed at the nearest painting of Olivia in the snowstorm, smiling like an angel. David's eyes suddenly welled up as he said, "Sophia, I've been having the same dream for some time. I dreamed we had a daughter named Olivia." Noah also reddened his eyes and added, "I dreamed of it too. Is it true?" I looked at them coldly and remained silent. That day, David and Noah examined every painting in the exhibition with red eyes. The final painting occupied an entire wall, depicting Olivia growing white wings and soaring into the sky under Iceland's dazzling aurora. Olivia is my angel. She has been here all along. After that, David and Noah stayed in front of the painting for a long time and never appeared in my life again. When Noah was 11, Sophia remarried and soon had a daughter named Sunny. On Sunny's birthday, Noah climbed to the rooftop on the 37th floor and asked to see Sophia. David, looking impatient, told him to stop fooling around. Both father and son were stunned, recalling the same dream from their previous lives when Sophia stood on the 37th floor, swaying in the wind. They also urged her to stop messing around, just as Sophia did when she fell and blood splashed that day. In the aftermath of Olivia's death, which had been David's lingering nightmare for years, Sophia's assessment of him was accurate. He was truly a monster. He had always found Sophia too boring, too quiet, and too invisible, repeating the same things at home daily, wearing similar clothes, and living like a background figure. It wasn't until after their divorce that Sophia left without looking back, making David realize his feelings for her. She was like gentle rain, silently nourishing everything and infiltrating his life unnoticed. Once she suddenly left, it felt as though a huge hole had formed in his heart, impossible to fill. Naturally, he called her name when he couldn't find anything, and when he turned around, he would have the illusion that she was waiting behind him. One late night after losing his love for her, his longing overwhelmed his reason like a fierce virus. He wanted to reclaim her but didn't understand anything, knowing nothing about Sophia's true feelings. He thought he had concealed his affair with Natalie well and could pretend nothing had happened. Sophia loved him deeply, and whenever he showed even a hint of kindness, she would return without hesitation. He didn't realize that Noah had informed Sophia about everything behind his back, nor did he understand what Noah had done in his previous life. He couldn't comprehend why Sophia looked at him with such cold and mocking eyes, as if he were something dirty. It wasn't until he had that dream about his past life that he began to repent, finally understanding his feelings for Sophia. Guilt, heartache, longing, and intense emotions nearly drove him insane. He knew he had to act. So he sought revenge on Natalie, kicking her out of the company, leaving her with nowhere to go, and forcing her into heavy debt. He even compelled her to sell her body, ultimately leading her to contract a disease and confront him with a knife. As she stabbed him into his heart, she frantically yelled, "Did I force you to cheat? Did I make you sleep with me? It's you. You can't control yourself. Why do you blame everything on me?" Yes, he was a disgusting person who shirked responsibility and avoided the truth. Knowing that Olivia had congenital heart disease, he likely ignored Sophia's pain during pregnancy, failing to address the causes that led to Olivia's condition. Instead of admitting his mistakes, he blamed Natalie for using her body to restrain him and for silencing his phone so he missed Sophia's calls on Olivia's last birthday. He accused Sophia of signing the consent form for giving up treatment without authorization and ending Olivia's life prematurely to prevent seeing her one last time. It was all their fault. He twisted the truth to convince himself that he wasn't wrong, making everything Noah did appear as his fault. As an 11-year-old in his previous life, Noah had suffered severe depression after Sophia's death. Sophia had noted that Noah's bad habits mirrored his own, which was entirely accurate. Just like David, Noah didn't know how to repent until Sophia died. Noah didn't realize how much he loved his mother, who had been mentally abused by him until Sophia passed away. He began crying for no reason, losing his temper inexplicably, and self-harming. If left unchecked, David watched all this coldly, not wanting to care for him in his previous life. David didn't know what happened to Noah after his death. However, after sharing the same dream about their previous lives, Noah in this life also endured severe depression, constantly crying and yearning to see Sophia. He concealed his heartache and asked David, "Dad, my heart hurts so much. Do I have a heart disease like my sister? If I do, can my mother and sister forgive me?" Yet, every time he went for a checkup, the results were normal. As he grew older and understood the psychological impact, he never asked David the question again, but still wanted to see Sophia. Since David was watching him, Noah could only observe Sophia's life through the internet and others. Upon discovering that Sophia had a new boyfriend, he began to provoke David just as he did to Sophia, deliberately informing David about Sophia's whereabouts with this man, her receiving gifts from him, kissing him, and accepting his proposal. Noah claimed Sophia was getting married, repeatedly telling David how happy she was after leaving them. He punished himself and tormented David, who finally understood how Sophia felt when facing Noah and why she was determined not to have that son. David was a hideous demon like Noah. He nearly went insane upon learning Sophia was getting married. He wanted to rush to her, grab her, and demand, "How can you get married? How can you fall in love with someone else? Have you forgotten Olivia?" But he restrained himself, even sending a decent gift when he learned Sophia was pregnant and had another daughter. David was heartbroken, but no longer excited. Noah created a commotion, but that day on the 37th floor rooftop, when both father and son were stunned by Noah's exclamation, "Don't mess around!" Noah descended the rooftop alone and never expressed a desire to see Sophia again. They examined Sophia's drawings together, and when a fan asked why she named her daughter Sunny instead of Olivia after creating so many Olivias, she replied, "Olivia is Olivia. Sunny is Sunny." Others might not understand, but David and Noah knew that Sunny wasn't a replacement for Olivia and wasn't meant to fill the void Olivia left. Sophia was a good mother who never showed favoritism among her children. Later, David invested half of his property in charity, establishing a foundation for children with cardiovascular diseases. As Noah grew older, he always recalled the bad memories from his previous life. Although he enjoyed games and admired Natalie, who designed games, he never intended to make Natalie his mother. Initially, he used this method to resist Sophia's control over him, but later he grew to hate that Sophia devoted most of her energy to Olivia. He feared that Sophia would stop loving him after having a sister, as people said in his previous life. At 11, he might not have realized that his deliberately provocative behaviors towards Sophia and Olivia were wrong, and he didn't want them to die. But once bad habits formed, negative words became automatic, leading him to become silent after entering university. He chose to study medicine, specializing in pediatric cardiovascular disease, and volunteered at the Children's Hospital during holidays. Alongside David, he sought to atone for their sins in their own ways. Many years later, Noah became a qualified pediatric heart surgeon, spending almost every day in the hospital treating patients or performing surgeries. He overworked himself, believing that curing more children could wash away the sins in his heart. Eventually, he met a beautiful and well-behaved 5-year-old girl suffering from the same congenital heart disease as Olivia. Noah was her surgeon. On the day of her operation, which was also her birthday, the surgery lasted 20 hours and was successful. Exhausted and smiling, Noah left the operating room but suddenly collapsed as his heart stopped, passing away with a smile.